was going to be so significant that it was going to impact our community for the next 2 generations. But we were saying that from the perspective of the Senate strategy of just confirming judges. We also knew that this was going to be a monumental year because of the census, and we needed to think short term in terms of the election, long term in terms of the Senate. And so we held an emergency summit at the beginning of the year looking at those 2 issues. Little did we know that a few weeks after that, we would be in the middle of a pandemic and have such a drastic change to our lives that we could have never imagined. And so now 2020 has the addition of the pandemic, which has had devastating impact on the Black community. Over 200,000 Americans are dead. The federal government has not released the demographics, but we know there's a disproportionate number of African Americans who have lost their lives to COVID. We have the health consequences, but we also have economic consequences. And the African American community has not recovered from the 2010 recession. And now to have what amounts to a depression in our community, it has been absolutely devastating. And so the Congressional Black Caucus started off by fighting to make sure that we could address the disproportionate impact that COVID was having in economics. And then while we're in the middle of that, George Floyd was murdered and tortured over 8 minutes, and the world saw that, which then took the issue of police abuse and police accountability in an entirely new level. As you know, the Congressional Caucus led the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act in the House of Representatives, and that bill imposed the
No.
What is empowerment? And so when we did that, we found that jobs, economics, and justice were all related in terms of the way of life for African Americans. So that's why we did it, and it encompasses everything from fair housing to adequate funding, not adequate, but equal and equitable funding of education for our public schools. It talks about making college affordable for our African American children and our parents who want their children to do better than they did. It talks about fatherhood initiatives for our African American males who are concerned with criminal justice reform and police reform, but they're also concerned with capital entrepreneurship. They're concerned with public education for their children. They're concerned with how their parents are going to live their lives out with dignity and respect in terms of Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, all those things. So the bill touches on everything, but it is a very unique piece of legislation, and that is an encompassing roadmap to the solutions that African Americans are facing on a daily basis. And I am just so glad that Chairwoman Bass has expanded on it to include wealth and all of the other areas that we found disproportionate impacts that we've offered solutions for. So with that, Madam Chairwoman, I will yield back my time. And again, thank you. And Congressman Hank Johnson for Georgia for all the work that you all have done. And Hank is a fearless lawyer and advocate for justice and has been away and on that battlefield before he ever came to Congress. So thank you all.
Well, thank you. I didn't realize you leaving judiciary. So
it's kept secret in town.
Thank you very much, Chairman Richmond. Let me introduce Representative Hank Johnson from the great state of Georgia. Hank serves on the Committee for Transportation and Infrastructure as well as Judiciary, and he chairs on Judiciary the subcommittee with intellectual property. He was one of the lead authors in the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act, and he also serves as the secretary of the CBC.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair, for hosting this event where we're talking with important people in the community who can get the word out about the great work that the Congressional Black Caucus has been doing under your leadership. But as we're talking about the Jobs and Justice Act, we've got to recognize the fact that it was the brainchild of your predecessor, Congressman Cedric Richmond out of New Orleans, Louisiana, who came in at a very crucial moment. It was when the Trump administration was also coming to power. And there was a lot of pressure on the CBC in terms of what are you going to do? What kind of relationship are you going to have with this new president? And so we had to navigate under the leadership of Cedric Richmond the kind of relationship that we were going to establish with the Trump administration. And it was one where we were not going to be used for a cheap photo op. And I think the work that Cedric did to guide us through that period where there was a lot of pressure for the CBC to submit to a situation where we could have just been used as a photo op. But instead, Cedric developed the concept behind the Jobs and Justice Act, which was really a comprehensive legislative strategy to address the unique concerns and experience of African Americans. That is who the CBC represents. That's what our body is all about, is making sure that we get the kind of attention in the legislative process that we deserve and that we demand. And so the Jobs and Justice Act was then entrusted to Cedric's predecessor or Cedric's successor, Congresswoman Karen Bass out of California, who has just done a remarkable job of leading the CBC through unprecedented times. And her foresight in doing so, it was just so keen. So to serve with both of these great leaders, I'm very happy to have done so. And my only regret about Cedric Richmond leaving the Judiciary Committee, where he has really distinguished himself as a powerful voice, is the fact that he does not sit ahead of me. And if he sat ahead of me and was leaving, then it would move me up the chain one more slot. But instead, I'm where I am, and that's fine. But anyway, I'm on the call to talk about the George Floyd Justice in Policing Act, which is a part of the Jobs and Justice Act. And now, whereas Cedric was the proponent, the genesis of the Jobs and Justice Act, it was Karen Bass who was the person who spearheaded the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act, and it brought together a number of legislative initiatives set forth by a number of our colleagues in the Congressional Black Caucus, and combined those initiatives into the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act. And that bill, under the leadership of Karen Bass, made its way through the House of Representatives, made its way through the committee and through passage in the House of Representatives in record time. It was less than 4 weeks, I think, that all of that work was done. And it took place right after the wanton and willful execution of George Floyd on video for all to see. A 8-minute and 46-second excruciating, painful death for George Floyd. And the whole world saw it, and the whole world realized that Black folks get policed differently than others. And so when they accepted that fact, that ushered in the ability of this act to pass, and its comprehensive police reform plus a criminal justice reform. Both of these areas have been, there has been a need for change for so long. We're getting it in the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act. One reason why police officers have felt that they could do anything in our community to us and get away with it, they've clearly gotten away with it, and so it has gotten worse. And one of the reasons for that is because there's been no accountability for their actions. When the federal government would see fit occasionally to charge a police officer with violating the civil rights of someone under federal law, they would lose the case 95% of the time because the standard of proof was so difficult to meet. And so the one thing that the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act does is to change the standard of proof in the criminal law, in the criminal civil rights law, to make it easier for prosecutors to be able to convict officers for depriving some of their civil rights. And the other accountability feature that is so important in the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act is that it changes the civil standard for holding officers accountable for violating a person's civil rights. So the elimination of the judicially created qualified immunity law is a part of the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act. And so when you're able to prosecute police officers effectively for violating civil rights, and when victims aggrieved can sue the police and get a judgment in court, that causes accountability to rise. And when there's accountability, folks end up changing their behavior. And so very proud to have those two features in the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act. And also there is a section that opens up the pattern and practice investigations that the Department of Justice used to conduct. They stopped conducting them under the Jeff Sessions, Donald Trump Justice Department, and but the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act makes it stronger, the pattern and practice investigations, by making sure that there's subpoena power that is a part of those investigations. And also the issue of law enforcement accreditation. We have a lack of basic core standards that every police department and every police officer needs to be held accountable to. So law enforcement accreditation sets forth some minimum standards that have to be met in terms of training of these law enforcement officers. And then you know, to get at the revolving door, I'll say, or actually it's deeper than that. It's like police officers going from one department to another, leaving behind in their previous department a open investigation into their official conduct. Well, when they leave that jurisdiction with an open case, that case ends up getting closed, and so they go to the next department with the same behavior that created the complaint against them in their previous department. Then they exercise activities that create more complaints, and then once they get complaints in that department, they move to the next department. And so to get at this problem of no accountability in terms of these official investigations that end up getting closed, we're going to have a data set whereby these complaints follow the officer regardless of where they go, and the transparency or that data would have the transparency being viewable by the public, so the public can see what kind of officer they are hiring. And that's going to cut down on these officers being able to move from one department to the other, bring the same habits with them, creating a trail of tiers, if you will, bad behavior with no accountability. And then also there will be a requirement of reporting the use of force by officers. Officers will have to file reports on their use of force, and their departments will have to share that information, forward that information to the Department of Justice, so that there will be a database. And as I've talked about, police training standards are included. There's a ban on no-knock search warrants in drug cases in federal law enforcement, and also a ban on chokeholds and carotid holds. And also there is a ban on the transfer of military weapons to state and local law enforcement agencies by the Department of Defense under the 1033 program that was abolished under the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act. And with that, Madam Chair, I will yield back.
Wonderful. Well, at this time, I'd like to open up for questions that people might have about jobs and justice, or anything else that the Congressional Black Caucus is involved in. Needless to say, when Ruth Bader Ginsburg died, that, in my opinion, is going to suck up all of the oxygen in the Senate. And needless to say, the Black Caucus is very, very concerned about the individuals that they clearly are on track to confirm. The question would be whether they will confirm her before or after the election. And that is going to be a focus of ours in this next time period. As we, number one, do everything we can to make sure people in all of our districts can vote. And of course, we're out telling people to vote early, to get a plan to understand how you vote in your area. And if you do voting from home, that you mail your ballots in as soon as possible, since this administration will go to all depths to cheat at this election. We have to anticipate for our ballots to be back before election day, or risk them not counting our ballots. So with that, why don't I open it up for questions from people who are attending?
Looks like we have a question from April Ryan.
Hello, Congresswoman, Congressman. Congressman Bass, I have two questions. One, when it's about the Supreme Court, when we the strong pillars of the court, like we did with Thurgood Marshall there was not a replacement when it came to civil rights. And with Ruth Bader Ginsburg, it does not look like there will be a replacement for her in this go round. Joe Biden, if he does win this election for president, he is still committed to having an African American woman as his nominee for U.S. Supreme Court. With that said, what are you looking for in that? Because, again, we don't have a third marshal on the court, and we just, for some, the notorious RBG. So what are you looking for in that nomination? Do you have names and then that you would refer? And two, I'm thinking back 4.5 years ago, when Donald Trump was candidate Trump, and he presented to Black America, what do you have to lose? When he became president, Cedric Richmond, the head of the CBC at the time, walked into the White House, I believe, there as well, in that meeting, with that blue book that I still have in my possession about explaining what we had to lose. Now, in COVID, that was pre-COVID, it seems the Black community has lost more. But can you articulate what the Black community is losing and has lost to answer Donald Trump 4 years later after his administration, during his administration?
Well, you know, I actually think it is going to take us a while to do an inventory of all of the damage that has happened. But you can look at it this way. Every federal agency, every cabinet officer that he appointed was given the assignment to destroy the agency they were in. And so if you look across the board, you can look at the EPA, you can look at DOJ, you can look at education, every single agency has been gutted, period, but has especially been gutted of any civil rights aspect of that agency. So environmental justice, for example, we know what's happening with education, and we know about his executive order that essentially put it in writing that said we want to make sure we get rid of anything having to do with racial equity, racial justice, racial awareness from the federal government. But I would begin, April, with COVID, because COVID is what is killing us. COVID is what is making us sick when we have no idea of the long-term impacts. We have the Affordable Care Act that the whole purpose of rushing, one of the purposes of rushing Supreme Court justice selection is because that case is due to be heard in the middle of September. And so we have healthcare as one of the big issues. But the other problem with COVID that we know is the economic problem. I will tell you that we don't know all of the damage. Let me tell you that one of the things the Congressional Black Caucus has done, because we could get certain things done through the Trump administration, we went out to the private sector. So the Black Caucus works lockstep with the Hispanic Caucus, the Asian Pacific Islander Caucus, and two Native American women. We went out and we recruited Black, Asian, Latino, and Native American researchers. We started a project that is headquartered at the Urban League. We got a couple of $1 million, and we asked each of the researchers to begin to document how the pandemic can impact us health-wise and economic-wise. And so my answer to you is it's going to take us a while to do the analysis of all of the ways this administration has hurt the African-American population. Now, you asked me about the Supreme Court. Yes, we don't have a Thurgood Marshall, but I do believe that we have a number of very prominent civil rights and judges around the country. I saw a list that the only person on the list I knew was Cheryl Ifill, which I thought was very exciting. So there might not be a Thurgood Marshall in terms of a Black judge that high up on a federal level that would be an obvious choice for the Supreme Court. But I have no doubt that there are many civil rights lawyers in our country who could fill the and
who's the RBG? Who's the RBG? Who's the Black woman who would be the RBG? for Joe Biden?
Well, again, I don't know. I mean, the name that comes to mind to me is Cheryl Neifeld, but I don't profess that I have wide knowledge of the civil rights lawyers around the country. Hank, feel free to jump in.
Well, no, I don't have anything to add. I would say that there are quite a few lawyers who become judges, African American lawyers who become judges, both men and female. They serving distinction on the federal district court, and also we have some appellate court judges who have the experience to be able to bring to the U.S. Supreme Court the kind of judicial philosophy that would balance out the conservative bent of the other justices who are on the court. And I'm sure that whether it be male or female, they would have I mean, when you look at the rights of females, equal protection under the law, I mean, that's the same issue that we as a people face, Black people. And so if you have a Black female, that is the best of both worlds. Someone who can have the values of a woman, experience of a woman, and at the same time as a Black person in America. So there are a number of people on the bench at this time who fit that profile, as well as people who are not on the bench, like Ms. Eiffel, who's been a practitioner of the law. And if you practice law, you can be a good judge, and you can move, just like Lewis Powell was a corporate lawyer who Richard Nixon took straight from his legal practice to the U.S. Supreme Court. There's no reason why a person like Mr. Eiffel could not have the same impact as Lewis Powell did. And Lewis Powell was a very corporate justice, and we need someone who is pro-people. And I know that Ms. Eiffel would be that way. So she would have my support, no doubt.
Thank you, Congresswoman, and thank you, Congressman.
Do we have another question from the audience or attendees? So we'll just go into the next part of it. Talk about, what's at stake in terms of our courts right now, and why it's important for Black America to get out the vote.
Well, I can speak to that.
Well, we are 36 days away from an election that I don't care. I don't say it's the most important election of our lifetime because, frankly, I'm tired of saying that. This election is a matter of life and death. If we don't get rid of this administration that refuses to address the pandemic, there is no reason to think we will have a million a year from now. And so I think it is absolutely a matter of life and death. And I think it's a matter of the next two generations as well, especially in terms of the court. So we not only have to win the White House, we not only have to have President Biden and Vice President Harris, we have to have a Democratic controlled Senate so that the president and vice president can govern. And we learned that from the Obama administration, what happens when you don't have the Senate. Now we'd be able to stop the confirmation of any more right-wing judges, because obviously President Biden would not propose right-wing judges, but the judges that he does propose, we have that experience from Obama to know that he would probably be very unlikely to have his judges confirmed. And so I think everything is at stake for us right now. We do have a 30-day from the census. So we do have another 30 days. The census will not finish until the end of October. We know that the Trump administration tried to end it early, and that won't happen. But to make sure that we have as much of our community counted as possible. We already know that there's a significant undercount of the Black community. I know a lot of that is related to COVID, but we do everything we can over the next 36 days. One, to make sure that our vote is out, but two, to make sure that our folks fill out the census. And so within jobs and justice, again, 271 bills covering health equity, COVID, environmental justice, of course, voting rights, education, housing, and wealth creation, poverty alleviation, community and economic development. And we will be happy to give you much more detailed information about the bill should you want further details. We introduced the bill. We're going to push for it. The most likely opportunity to have it really examined would be during the lame duck session. But if we're not able to get it, then of course we'll reintroduce the bill in the 117th Congress. So with that, if there is another question, we'll take another question and then we'll wrap up after that.
Okay, we have a question from Karen. You are permitted to speak.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Karen,
Thank
if
you.
you are attempting to speak, you are muted.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you so much. I was wondering.
Okay, we'll give it another minute. And Karen, if you're not able to get on, you can certainly send us that question a little later. Are there any other questions? All right, well, let me thank you very much, and I will ask Representative Johnson if he has closing comments.
Well, I would
Yeah.
like to.
Go ahead, Representative Johnson.
Yeah, I'd like to.
I think you're muted.
The lady. Well,
There you go. There you go.
Can you hear me now?
No.
So yeah, you're having a problem hearing me, but
It looks
everyone
like
else
we
can
have
hear you.
lost sound. I am not sure what is happening
Yeah.
there.
Yeah.
Why don't
We've
I
lost
just thank everyone for attending? And if there are any questions, please contact our office. We'll be happy to give you much more information about jobs and justice and any questions that you might have. Thank you very much. Sorry for the loss in audio.